welcome back. We're so happy you're joining us for episode 2. In this episode, we're going to be discussing eclipses and the moon. We'll start by providing an overview of the moon and our moons, our natal moons, how we engage with it. We'll talk a lot about the eclipse, more details on what an eclipse is, the history of eclipses, and personal stories about it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Renee, who's going to start off by giving you an overview of the moon.
We're going to be talking about the two main moon phases, if you will. There are many. For those of you like myself who back in elementary school did a moon tracker and you had to write down each night all the different phases. The reason that we are only talking about two is because they are crucial to what an eclipse is. So we're setting the foundation for that later conversation. New moons. They mark new beginnings, and they're a great time to plant seeds for whatever your next chapter is, what you're trying to call in. Then we have full moons, which mark a culmination point. All of the lore about werewolves and all that jazz, things happening during a full moon, it's because there's a culmination, there's a tension in the air. And they're also a great opportunity to figure out what should stay if you're taking inventory of your life and what should go. New moons are what you want to call in, and full moons are what you'd like to release. Next, we're going to be going over our natal moons. For background, that means what phase the moon was in on the day that you were born.
Very interesting. Renee and I were both born under the waxing gibbous moon phase. On a side note, I was pronouncing gibbous gibbonus, and I was confusing the gibbon monkey with the moon.
Good for you for mixing it up, because it shows a knowledge of primates I don't have.
But why do I know so much about monkeys? The waxing gibbous moon Renee was born under was actually one day before a full moon, which is significant because it has the energy of reaching a pinnacle of what needs to be released, which can have a little bit of tension. I was born under a waxing gibbous moon 2 days after the first quarter moon, which basically there's nothing attached to it. Renee kind of gets the special symbolism there. And the waxing gibbous moon, the meaning or the characteristics, we generally tend to value external accomplishment and tension around being enough or feeling enough. We also have endless reserves of energy and drive, but need to schedule rest. And I know Renee feels this too. I could go on for days, working and being productive, but the most important thing is resting and reminding myself that rest is productive.
All right, awesome. I'm going to be covering the astrological side. So the day that you were born, your natal moon can also carry astrological symbolism and archetypes. The day I was born was a Virgo moon, and Christine was born under a Capricorn moon. Virgo moons need to fill your own cup so that you can not only be in service of others, but be in service of yourself. And that's the primary objective and potentially preoccupation or challenge that Virgo moons can face. Because if you fill your cup first, then you actually can do what you're compelled to, which is help others. On the Capricorn moon side, your moon can signify a deep sense of wisdom, connection to the ancestral realm, and there's somewhat of a tension or duality there because it's the sea goat, so it's going under the sea, that's the depth, the wisdom, and the goat wants to climb the mountain, go to the mountaintop. You're relying on or leaning into the deep wisdom, the history, tradition, as well as looking to climb the mountain, connecting to higher vision, dreams, and putting in the work to get there.
Connected to your ancestral realm, I've always talked to my ancestors, people who have passed on, and I do like to go deep. I like that part, the sea part of the goat. I like to go deep, but I am also very ambitious, trying to go to the mountaintop of all of my dreams. Renee, do you feel like you identify with your Virgo moon in the same way?
100%. When I first started learning about astrology, which we will talk about in a future episode more in depth, I really resonated with the Virgo moon. And Christine, spoiler alert, has a ton of Virgo energy in her natal chart as well. So we have many of those traits in common. But for me in particular, the moon is the ruler of my chart. It's the most important energy. So the moon placement is incredibly significant and impactful and representative of my personality and part of how I function and operate in the world. And something that we didn't talk about here, but on the astrological side, the moon represents your emotions, your internal world, and your processing. So, from that standpoint, the Virgo energy, the thinking, the discernment, the work orientation, accomplishment, service, getting things done, organization, all of that is definitely representative of how I function and also how I process my emotions. So, stepping back, how we engage with the moon through its entire life cycle, regardless of the phase. So, Christine, I will turn it over to you. What do you do?
For me, I feel like my rituals change, but I always find that when I listen to my intuition about how and when I want to do a ritual on a new or full moon, I'm usually right as to like what I needed in that moment. So for example, if a full moon is exact on a Friday and you're sitting there and you're like, I don't know, I don't really feel like doing a full moon ritual right now. There's probably a good reason why. You can do it the next day. You don't have to do it exactly on that day. That energy is around for a little bit, so you can do it a day or two after, and I usually end up doing it a day or two after. I recently did that with the Virgo full moon. The one thing I always make sure I do is at a minimum write out my intentions or what I want to release in my notes app in my phone so I can go back and check it out. So I like to plan with the moon in 2 week and 6 month cycles. So on a new moon, I'll set an intention and kind of check back in 2 weeks at the next full moon to see how it's going. And I'll also keep in mind that the new and full moons line up on a 6 month cycle as well. So if I've planted a seed and that much has happened in 2 weeks, that might be a seed that's going to grow over the next 6 months. I also try to take a bath. The moon rules the water sign Cancer. So I try to do something with a body of water. Usually it's a bath because that's the easiest way to do it. 2 cups of Epsom salt, 1 cup baking soda, and a handful of salt, maybe some essential oils. And I sit in the bathtub for 15 minutes and I listen to binaural sounds in my headphones. And it's just a way for me to connect with water. I also try to do a tarot pull, again, as a way for me to, and here's the Virgo in me, have some data around what was going on at each full moon. So, really interesting. The last Virgo new moon, which was in September of 2023, I wrote down, I planted a seed that I wanted to gain clarity on my romantic relationship. And I also wanted to create and launch a new business. That new moon occurred right before eclipse season. In October, I created and launched my business. And in November, this is all around the eclipses, my romantic relationship started to crumble and eventually crumbled into December. My point being, by the full moon recently, I got everything that I asked for, clarity around my romantic relationship, and I achieved my goal of creating a new business. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And this is why I like to write things down because we can go back and look, hey, I set this intention. Did I make it? Why or why not? What worked and what didn't? And that's how you can sort of work with the new and full moons.
Kind of similar to what Christine does. I do new moon and full moon rituals of some kind, always writing something down. On the day of the new moon, I create a calendar event on the day of the full moon, which is cast out the 6 months. And I will put a note there where I write down what I was looking to call in. That way I don't have to go back and dig. I've already given that gift to my future self to have it on hand, and an alert will go off on that day so I can read it. I have a planner that's an astrology planner, so I will use any prompts that they might have. But typically, the exercise for the new moon is looking into what energies it's picking up on based on the astrology. So what that cycle is, so if you were looking at Virgo, what's the Virgo energy? What's the placement in your chart? What do you want to manifest in this area, or just in general? And you're writing it down. So I'll take a second, I'll sit there, I'll go inward, and I just write down whatever words come in. And as I mentioned before, sometimes it's some very poetic stuff, or I write it down and wonder, why on earth did I write that? And that's the process. It's just trusting it. So the full moon is extra gratitude. So I do nightly gratitude anyway in my journal, but I will do additional gratitude that day. It's looking back on that 6-month cycle. It's seeing what came to fruition, whether it was related to something that you wrote down or just in general, thinking about the previous 6 months. We have a bath shower situation. I don't do a full bath, but I have a little collapsible tub, and I will put in the hot water. I have a variety pack of all these different Epsom salt, lavender or coconut or whatever the other things are. So I go through, I put a bunch of that in. I'll just sit there roasting my feet, and I will do journaling or reading or some other calming activity while doing that. I, unlike Christine, have a lot of water in my chart. So it is important to reconnect and actually ground with the water. I've also been told that by many psychics over the years, and that was before I had learned about my astrological chart, that they would tell me that I have a deep connection to the water element. And the new moon, I will clean. You need the space physically to call it in. So it's almost the energy of a spring cleaning for people who do that. Picking up stuff finally that has been driving you crazy that you haven't put that away, or dusting or cleaning the floor. So I'll typically do some cleaning or organization on a new moon, and then the foot bath on the full moon. And then both will feature some sort of a mini meditation and journaling exercise. Next, we're going to be talking about eclipses. We've laid the foundation for moons overall and how they relate to us, our practices with them, and how we engage. And one of the most powerful moons is actually an eclipse. And eclipses come in cycles. You may have heard the term eclipse season. That's because eclipses happen more than once in a given year. An eclipse is a particular alignment of the sun, moon, and earth that obstructs either the sun, that would be a solar eclipse, full moon, and can last up to 8 minutes, or that obstructs the moon. That's a lunar eclipse, which happens on a new moon and can last up to 4 hours. This solar eclipse and lunar eclipse cycle can happen, either can be first or second, approximately 2 weeks apart. And when you factor in a week or so before, a week or so after, that entire block of time in and around a month is referred to as the eclipse season. If you look at an eclipse based on the sign it's in astrologically, that specific cycle occurs every 18 years. Current eclipse energies that we are in, the last time that they occurred were 2013 to 2015, 2004 to 6, 1995 to 1997. I only did those ones because that's when Christine and I were alive, but it keeps going if you go back in time. So ultimately, you can look back at those periods of time as well as the one that we're in now, which is 2023 to 2025. You would look at the characteristics of those cycles. What milestones occurred for you? What happened? If you haven't done this yet, just think back what was occurring at each of those points. Even if you're not familiar with astrology and you're not looking at what houses they are assigned to in your chart, you could still look back and identify patterns. Next, for a little background on eclipses, we dove into the history, and eclipses are associated with deaths, upheavals, especially of leaders, dynasties, major structures. So that's why they pack a punch. They are a supercharged energy, not just your average new moon or full moon that occurs every month. Eclipses have some extra power. If you remember back to the full moons and new moons are tied to beginnings, and full moons are tied to endings or releases. So that's essentially what's happening here. You're going to have a cycle of a new moon, the full moon, and the pair of them together have a heightened energy tied to some sort of a beginning and some sort of ending, a new chapter. I have some examples in history, and there's many, many. If you look out there, you'll find more. But to give a little context, some events that occurred directly on an eclipse, either solar or lunar, their births, such as Alexander the Great, Prince William and Kate Middleton. There's coronations. If you look back in the royal family, there's countless coronations, ends of dynasties, handing over of the crown that happen on eclipses. Also, in the Bible, there's language around the death of Jesus happening on an eclipse. And in American history, so that's where we're recording this, the First Continental Congress met on an eclipse. If you cast that out a little bit farther to within the eclipse cycle, that couple week period in between, there were other events such as the sinking of the Titanic, the MLK assassination, the COVID news emerging. That's when it started getting picked up by a lot of the major news outlets, and the health organizations were putting announcements and statements out, changing policies. And then on the political side, a very interesting example, just to highlight that your natal moon and what's happening in the sky and the energies there can be very symbolic and impactful in your life. One example being Barack Obama. He was born right around an eclipse within the cycle. It would symbolize eclipses might be important for him in his life. And that has proven to be true because then he was elected on an eclipse and then he was reelected on an eclipse. Those are all big milestones, major events for him, all tied to eclipses. All right, and I will turn it over to Christine to talk about more of those energetics and how they may impact you on a personal level.
Renee, that was so interesting. I love learning about history when history and astrology line up. During eclipse season, especially if you're sensitive to energies, you may feel really tired. The energy is really intense. You might have difficulty sleeping. Your intuition is heightened. So you might be having more intense dreams or predictive dreams. People may be visiting you in your dreams if you're me. So your intuition might be heightened around this time, and you may just have a knowing of what's coming, and that's pretty cool. Some people do tend to feel ill, like maybe you're a little like nauseous around an eclipse season, but I think that's for people who tend to be very sensitive to energies. There are some recommended practices during an eclipse season or an actual eclipse transit that you can do, like tracking your emotions, tracking your energy, your thoughts, your events. The reason that we would suggest doing any of this is because our intuition is heightened. So you may get some downloads and you may get some patterns and insights that are coming up in the next few weeks or the next 6 months or the next couple of years. In those years that Renee was talking about, they all seem to be transitory years for me. 2004 to 2006, I was graduating high school and starting college. I was becoming a new person. 2013 to 2015, I was coming into my own in my career and leaving a very comfortable position to go into a new one to allow myself to grow. 2023, I started a business. That's another transitory cycle for me. So I encourage you to do the same for yourself and see what pattern is there. You're going to hear me say this a lot, but remember to rest during an eclipse season. The energy is really high. We're downloading a lot of stuff we're not typically usually downloading. If you're sensitive to energies, you're feeling a lot of things that you're not typically feeling throughout the rest of the year. It's okay to not go out one night and sit on the couch and watch Netflix. That's a part of your self-care. I think I touched on it a little bit, but we're going to go ahead and share some of our eclipse stories. Renee, do you want to go first?
This cycle that we are in, the main themes that are highlighted in my life, which are true, and I would have said without the fact that I have some understanding of my chart, is an emphasis on work and career, as well as a sense of home. So for Aries, for me, it's a career, it's being out in the world, it's how I present, traveling, learning, growing. And then Libra is home, those close relationships. So in a sense, there's a polarizing energy when you're talking about eclipses, and that's true for all of them, that they're going to be in opposite signs, hence why there's a lot of tension. So for me, if I look back at this cycle, I then was impacted by a layoff at my company. So that's a whole other reset in my career, thinking about, well, what direction am I going? What do I want to do for work? What do I want to do for my career in the long term? How do I want to be seen? You could make the argument, what we're doing with this podcast right now is putting myself in a public position. I'm doing the learning, the sharing, the exploration. It is pulling in those energies when you look at my natal chart. I also have examples where I've tapped in to astrological events without even realizing it. I had decided after my breakup over the summer, I just had a feeling, okay, I want to make sure I give myself some time to decompress. I'm not going to go back onto online dating until this specific date. I just picked a date. It came to me. I had the marker in my head. It was several months out. And the date was October 14th, which I then learned was the day of an eclipse. So there's all sorts of different manifestations, big or small. I got sick right before the eclipse, was sick for all of October going into early November. And then all of the different work impacts that happened through the whole cycle, just because of our age difference, similar to what Christine was saying. If you look back at the other ones, okay, 95 to 97, I wasn't even conscious. I was just born. I would say the only significance in these areas of the chart is I would be curious to know when my brother was born in relation to the eclipses, because if you're looking at home and family, my brother was born in 1997. So that would have been a significant milestone. 2004 to 6, in there I graduated elementary school. And then 13 to 15, it was kind of in the middle of a cycle. It didn't necessarily hit, but I was going through a lot of growth for sure in college. And then we've already touched on 2023 and beyond. So more to explore with that as it unfolds. As far as how the 2023, the current cycle, is going, what's been happening for you, Christine?
What hasn't been happening for me, Renee?
It's so
So
true. It's been really a time.
it really is. And the more I talk to people who are not as into what we do as we are, the more I hear they're like, oh, the second half of 2023 was rough. And yeah, the second half of 2023 was rough for all of us. Spring, I was laid off from my job, which is interesting because as a Virgo sun with a Capricorn moon, I've never done anything wrong in my entire life. So it was just happenstance that they laid me off. They really went in. I was the last person hired, so I was the first person let go. Is when I went down to City Hall and got my business incorporated. My business birth date is October 23rd. And then during the fall season of eclipses, my romantic relationship ended and my uncle passed away. So it'll be interesting to see what happens during the spring eclipses after that had happened, because that was an ending, but also a beginning. So what's going to happen in the spring? And the other thing I'd like to touch on is that there have been years during eclipse season where it has felt like nothing happened for me. Typically in June, something usually happens related to my career, but it's never felt as monumental as like a layoff has in 2023. So I know we're talking about a lot of intense things that have happened around eclipses. I feel like most of the time there's not a lot going on. And then something will trigger your chart and you'll be like, what the F is going on? Feels like everything's happening all at once. And that's because the eclipse season is hitting your chart specifically. So I do want to put that in there as well.
What are the odds that we meet each other under the circumstances and we happen to have these charts that are inversions of each other? All of these events that we've been talking about where things were mirroring each other, well, they were literally mirroring and they were happening in opposition because they're happening in opposite areas of the chart at the same time. So we weren't having the breakup happening at the same time. We were having it happen 6 months later, because then it was under a different eclipse in the same cycle. So it's happening at opposite points. So when you think about it under that context, because obviously this is some woo-woo stuff here, like if you put it under that lens, it completely makes sense why it would be happening and happening in the way that it was.
So wild. This podcast is coming out on March 23rd. So if you're listening in real time, 2 days later, we're going to have a lunar eclipse. If you want to get more technical, it's a penumbral lunar eclipse in Libra. So penumbral means that the moon is in Earth's secondary shadow, and it's basically harder to see with the naked eye. The lunar eclipse energy that we're going to experience during this time is around healing wounds and our inner child, tuning into our emotions and where our emotions are being drained. So hopefully that's helpful if you want to work with the lunar eclipse, maybe set some intentions around wounds that you want to heal or do some inner child work. This eclipse is going to be exact on March 25th, 2024 at 3 a.m. Eastern Time. 2 weeks later, on April 8th, we have a total solar eclipse in Aries that's going to be exact at 2:21 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you're looking for an afternoon delight, this is it. So a total solar eclipse is when the sun is completely blocked out. And for all of us geeks out there, never look at it directly. I actually have some solar eclipse glasses in my apartment that I'm very excited to use in April. The energy for this eclipse is going to be around clearing something out so that we can move forward. And the good news is that this is going to be closely followed by a Chiron cazimi. A cazimi is when the sun is conjunct or sitting right on top of a planet. This can happen in forward motion or retrograde. Having a Chiron cazimi so close to a solar eclipse, this is going to be happening within minutes, provides a ton of support for healing the Aries energy and any linked houses. Eclipses are associated with change, and they tend to be associated with abrupt change. So getting a superpowered healing right after that should be really great for us. It may be hard, but I mean, a little bit of healing can be very helpful during these times. What have we learned this week?
I was listening to a podcast this morning, shocker, in this conversation. I don't even know what they were talking about, but the guest in the interview defined the word decide. And I had to pause it and go back and re-listen. And then I looked it up online because I wanted to see, well, that was a very colorful choice of words that she used. So I wanted to confirm it. And I did end up seeing a definition that was relatively similar. Decide means, in her words, the guest words, it was to kill off a choice. And I thought, whoa, kill off a choice. That's really strong. If you actually look up the etymology of the word decide, it means to cut off. But I thought that that was super fascinating, even thinking about the ideas of choosing something or deciding, that actually when you look up choice and choosing, it stems from taste. So it's you're sampling it. So choosing is you're sampling, and deciding is cutting something off. We tend to use decide and choose in a very similar context, but if you look at the true meanings of the words, they're actually very different. So if you're making a decision, you could consider it under this lens of what are you deciding to cut off?
And also, so interesting that that's what you've learned on an episode about abrupt change comes up. You know, like, what are we cutting away? What are we deciding?
Yes.
So I think that's pretty cool.
Right. It's very full moon. What are you releasing? What are you cutting off? What are you shedding?
One thing that I don't know if it's that I learned, but I thought it was like a poignant point. I too was listening to a podcast. I was listening to the Modern Love podcast from the New York Times, which I'm obsessed with. At the end of her essay, she writes how startlingly beautiful impermanence can be. So in the context, she's talking about how different flowers are in season during different times. Things in life are beautiful because they're not going to be here forever. We only have a short period of time to appreciate them. We all need to be reminded of it. Nothing is permanent. And again, so poignant during eclipse season. Nothing is permanent, and that's what makes it beautiful.
To add on, the moon cycle itself. It's
Mm.
representative of change. There's peaks, there's valleys in your emotions, in your life. That's a reminder we have in the sky. The moon is never the same every night that you look at it.
Mm-hmm. And it's beautiful.
The perfect metaphors
I
for
know, we
this
didn't even
podcast.
plan it.
We didn't even plan it. Now we're going to do our channeled messages for our listeners for this week.
Yes, we are.
I had a mantra come up first, which is interesting because it felt initially as though it was for me to tap in, but then I kept repeating it and I wrote it down because I felt compelled to share. So, reverse reading here, leading with a mantra. You may want to go for all 4 parts, others you pick and choose. It's a customizable. I'm getting Build-A-Bear. So you can take what works, leave the rest. The full mantra, the platter to choose from, the buffet, is I trust the energy, I trust the process, I trust my guides, I trust myself. The initial message that I got was a visual of opening a lockbox. And inside there's papers with stamps on them. Stamps as in not a mail stamp, but an ink stamp. And then what I started getting was some language accompanying that of recalibration of address. So one would say, well, you just said it's not mail stamps. But I was getting mail forward, think forward, go forward. So there's a sense of momentum. And I think tying it back even to that initial paragraph of a mantra, that there's some aspect of movement, next steps, a plan, a change, because you need trust for all of those components. And it's not being afraid to take action because that's the energy. That's what's meant for you, the process, the journey. You're going to learn something from it. You have the support, your guides, whatever you believe from that standpoint. If it's spirit on the other side, if it's universe, if it's people in your life, your support system that are physically with you to support you, and then always trusting yourself because that's the core.
I love that so much, and it tracks with what I was picking up. You know, it's all dark and cerulean blue, and the moon is like a light yellow. And there's a little kid sitting on the moon, and I hear the theme song to Reading Rainbow. And the little kid's sitting on the moon and just jumps off the crescent moon and sort of like skydives down to, I'm going to call it Earth, but it's whatever creative, like nature, I guess Harold in the purple crayon was drawing with his crayon. He's just exploring whatever the new environment is. And if you think of a kid's cartoon, like one day they're in the jungle, the next day they're at a carnival, it's kind of like just being open to anything that the universe kind of has for you, which also seems very fitting for a podcast about eclipses. Just allow your destiny to unfold, see what comes up and receive. And the mantra that came up, allow the universe to blow your mind. We don't know generally what's going to happen during eclipse season. Be open to whatever it is. Listeners, do with that what you will.
Totally.
Thanks for listening.
If you'd like to learn more, the resources we used to prepare for this episode are listed in the show notes.
You can reach me, Christine, at Channeled by Christine with 1L on Instagram.
And you can reach me, Renee, at _read by Renee, or connect with both of us via email at synergytosynastry@gmail.com.
Keep your spirit curious and your aura sparkling.
We'll see you when the stars next align.
I give a lot of credit to the people who like drop Easter eggs, Taylor Swift, because it's not easy. That was the hardest thing I did all day.
I don't know. I probably should still get a light.
If you're meeting with anyone aside from me, yeah, because I don't care. But I mean, the lighting in my apartment is just not terrible, but like it's annoying. I have to get my light out to make myself look not dead.
Well,
Like
you know
burnt
what it
it.
is? It's the fluorescence.
I know, and it's so annoying because I had yellow tinted lights, and then I felt like I looked yellow. Was that the line?
I did it.
You did? I don't even know what it
Yes.
is. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph.